There was a time when Foden wasn't just a truck maker, it was Britain. From the Cheshire workshops to the heavyweight rigs on Britain's motorways, the name Foden carried weight. It meant rugged reliability, British steel, and a legacy of haulage that stretched back generations. But today, you barely see the badge. The workshops are silent, the branding gone, the machines replaced. This is how one of Britain's greatest truck makers slipped through our fingers. Founded in the mid-1800s, Foden began with steam engines and farm machinery, but as the century turned, the company shifted into truck manufacturing with purpose. By the 1950s and 60s, Foden trucks were everywhere, from local hauliers to heavy-duty mining operators. They were built for the long haul, designed to take abuse and keep going. Drivers trusted Fodens because they knew what they were getting. No fuss, no hype, just work done well. The golden era rolled on. Foden launched the Fleetmaster in the late 1970s, hoping to take on the Continentals with high-spec, stronger engines, sleeper cabs, and driver comfort. It seemed like a turning point, British engineering stepping up, and for a moment the UK truck industry dared to believe it could compete. Foden had powerful Cummins diesel engines, modern cab design, and loyalty from fleets that had grown up with the brand. But celebrations were premature. While Foden focused on building its heavy haulage reputation, the market around it shifted rapidly. European makers were innovating fast. Air suspension, automatic gearboxes, driver comfort that felt almost like a car, and British firms, many of them, struggled to keep pace. Foden found itself caught between its past and an uncertain future, trying to maintain tradition while needing to overhaul nearly everything. Then the trouble really began. In the early 1980s, Foden hit financial trouble. They had invested heavily in a new production facility, expecting booming exports and rising demand. Instead, demand stalled. The oil crisis, economic downturns, and changing transport rules all hit at once. The workforce that once numbered thousands was cut back, orders shrank, and the innovation that trucks needed to stay ahead was missing. In 1980, the company went into receivership. A proud British mark, built over decades, suddenly found itself begging for survival. It was rescued by an American firm, PACCAR, which bought Foden to give it a chance, but with conditions. The factory shrank, models reduced. The uniqueness faded. Foden became less of a creator and more of a branch of a global company. The loyal drivers and workshops still kept the faith. Foden trucks kept doing the job, but each passing year made the legacy thinner. The badge might have been the same, but the spirit wasn't. Foden trucks started blending in instead of standing out, and worse, they started disappearing from fleets. By the late 1990s, Foden was no longer in the game as it once was. Ownership changes, product lines reduced, badging shifts. Models that once shouted British backbone were now rebadged versions of foreign-built trucks. The workshops in Sandbach and other UK sites were closed or repurposed. The expertise that once grew in Cheshire began to drift away. Finally, in 2006, the curtain fell. Foden trucks stopped being produced as Fodens. The badge was retired. No grand parade, no farewell tour. Just a quiet end to a proud story. One of Britain's last great independent truck manufacturers disappeared. So why did it happen? Not because Foden built bad trucks, not because drivers stopped preferring them. It was the bigger picture: globalization, union issues, government policy, lack of reinvestment, the fact that while Foden had heritage, it didn't always have the cash, and when the money ran out, the badge couldn't hold the company up. For drivers and mechanics who grew up with Fodens, it stings. It's not just losing a brand. What followed wasn't a clean handover or a graceful transition. It was more like a quiet burial. No headlines, no national mourning, no big send-off, just silence. Drivers moved on, companies rebranded, but for those who lived and breathed haulage, it left a hole. And let's be honest, it wasn't just the trucks that vanished, it was the entire ecosystem around them. The family-owned dealerships that specialized in Foden parts, the engineers who knew the quirks of every model, the drivers who could handle a Foden blindfolded. They were forced to adapt or leave the industry altogether. Some tried to keep their rigs running, but sourcing parts grew harder. PACCAR offered little support for the heritage side of things. If it wasn't a DAF or a Kenworth, it didn't seem to matter, yet the loyalty never truly died. Enthusiasts still gather at vintage truck rallies across the UK, celebrating the Foden name like it's a badge of honor. They polish the paint, restore the cabs, and keep the roar of those Cummins engines alive. It's more than nostalgia, it's defiance, a quiet refusal to let one of Britain's greatest names be forgotten. And you can't blame them for holding on, because Foden wasn't like the rest. The trucks had personality, they looked different, sounded different, and drove like nothing else. Whether it was the tilt cab on the Alpha or the aggressive stance of the S106, these lorries had soul. You could feel it in the way they pulled, the way they climbed hills, the way they stayed planted through country bends. They weren't just vehicles, they were tools of trade and companions for life on the road. And it's worth asking, could Foden have survived? Some say yes. That if the government had stepped in, like they did for the railways or shipbuilding, things might have been different. Others argue the writing was on the wall. Global logistics had changed. The market was consolidating. Fleet buyers wanted uniformity, cheap parts, low overheads. Big names like Volvo, Scania, and MAN were swallowing up market share with massive investment and slick marketing. Foden simply couldn't match that scale. But here's the kicker. The demand for strong, reliable, British-made lorries never really went away. Even now, decades later, there's a craving for something that feels local, something that feels like home. A truck built not in a factory thousands of miles away, but in the same land it's meant to drive. That's what Foden represented. And in many ways, its death became a warning, a case study in what happens when heritage is handed over to boardroom decisions, when globalization outpaces tradition, when loyal workers and passionate drivers become numbers in a spreadsheet. It's no coincidence that morale dipped across British haulage firms in the years following Foden's fall. That was more than economic, it was emotional. Like the soul had been ripped from the road. Even within PACCAR, there were questions. Why buy a legacy brand only to mothball it? Why erase a century of innovation? Some insiders claim Foden was always meant to be a placeholder, a bridge to bring DAF deeper into the UK market. Once the name had done its job, it was discarded. Whether that's true or not, it certainly felt that way to the people who lived it. And yet, Foden trucks still turn heads. That badge, small and simple, still holds power. It tells a story of grit, of British craftsmanship, of pride. You'll find ex-Foden drivers who still talk about their rigs like old mates, who still remember every gear, every rattle, every roadside repair. Ask them what it meant to drive a Foden and they'll tell you. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. The cab might have been cold, the suspension stiff. Because progress didn't include the voices of those who built the roads and kept the country moving. But even now, long after the last one rolled off the line, Foden's story hasn't truly ended. It lives in scrapyard rebuilds, in club meetups, in the stubborn hands of drivers who refuse to scrap their machines. And it lives in the memories of Sunday mornings in laybys, of headlights cutting through Welsh fog, of calloused hands gripping worn steering wheels. In a way, maybe Foden got the last word, because while the companies that replaced it are still chasing contracts and cutting costs, Foden remains something purer, a symbol of what haulage once was, a reminder of what it meant to build something that lasts, not just in miles, but in hearts. And that kind of legacy? You can't buy that. You can't replace it with a fleet spreadsheet or a fresh paint job. Foden was more than a logo, it was Britain, and it always will be.